crime and punishment have been around for a very long time. And no matter how much we punish people, it doesn't seem to do anything about the crime rate. You know, the answer is not in the criminal justice system. I don't want to say like I fell into something that took me several years of studying, but you know, broadly speaking, that is what happened. I finished university with a philosophy degree. No one does a philosophy degree and knows what they're going to do with their life. I messed around for a couple of years, and then I started working in psychiatric care in a secure psychiatric hospital for a while. And I really loved it. I loved helping people. You make peanuts, you get assaulted. The truth that I realized there that I would apply also to what I do right now is people are people. You know, they're good and bad. I think in my mind, I had an idea that because someone has significant mental health issues and suffered, that this act of suffering would somehow make them a good person, like an innocent person. But actually, mentally ill people are good and bad. There's good ones, there's bad ones. I think it's probably the same for people that find themselves in the criminal justice system. Very few of them are out and out bad. Most of them are just complicated and messy like the rest of us. And so I went and did a conversion course to get a law degree. And one day, my friend she got divorced. Her divorce papers came in. We got very drunk at her house. I went to law school the next day, not having slept very well. I was trying to sign up for a negotiation competition, but I signed up for something called mooting, which is a debating competition. By the time I realized the mistake, it was too late to change. So I went with the mooting competition and I started doing pretty all right. So I thought, okay, well, this is me then. I enjoy the fact that every day is a bit different. It's super high pressure, but that really keeps me on my toes. I love the advocacy, and it is like drugs. Honestly, when you really hit a flow state and you look over to a jury and you've got like 6 or 7 people nodding along with you, you start to feel like, you know, you are God. The flip side of that is when you lose, you start to feel like a worm. So, you know, depending on how that went, you know, it's God or a worm walking out of there. But it's high stakes, you know, and that really is engaging. I enjoy helping people. I enjoy being there for people that normally don't really have many people, if any people, caring about them, you know, and just being there at some of their worst times. That's a real honor. It's a very specifically, it's something that's unique to like our jurisdiction. Jurisdictions that now have the solicitor barrister divide are normally because they're former colonies or Commonwealth countries. I don't know if it's the same in Northern Ireland. Scotland has a slightly different system, but England and Wales has a bifurcated system. So there's solicitors and barristers. Historically, it was the barrister that was the lawyer. And they were the people that had been legally trained, gone to university, and had qualified. And essentially what they would have is an assistant, and this assistant would go around to various places and say, well, have you any need of a lawyer? And they would be soliciting on their behalf. Rolling down the years, basically what it means is the solicitor normally is the person who engages with the client. So they're the person that when you need a lawyer, you'll talk to them first. They will advise you. They do the drafting. The only time normally you need a barrister is if the issue is going to go to court. So in criminal law, actually, almost everything goes to court. So I think I've never looked at the breakdown of this, but I would imagine most people at the bar, in terms of pure numbers, are criminal barristers, although I'm not sure. Essentially, the barrister is your advocate. They know the rules of evidence. They will present the case in court for someone, and then they'll hand it back to the solicitor, and the solicitor will do everything else. Typically speaking, if you're a member of the public, you can't hire me. Only other lawyers can hire me. So only the solicitor can hire me. Now, that is not always the case, because now people can qualify for something called direct access, but historically that's what it was. So yes, you would go to the police station, you would have a duty solicitor provided, and a duty solicitor Normally they hold a contract for a certain police station, so certain days of the week that firm, they provide the duty. The duty will come in, and they will normally take over your case for its longevity. So they'll help you with the interview, they'll help you with the first appearance, and if you go to the Crown Court, which is where you would normally see a barrister in criminal law, at least, you don't typically use them in the magistrates' court. They would hire your barrister. There are lots of different hearings in the Crown Court, and I think you could break them down into about 4 types of hearing. So the first one would be what's called a PTPH, or plea and trial preparation hearing. And what that is your first hearing in the Crown Court, where you would go guilty or not guilty normally. And if you go guilty, then you move on to another type of hearing, which is called a sentence. And if you go not guilty, you move on to what's called a trial. And in addition to that, if there's any hearings in between, we would call those a case management hearing. And that's normally to make sure things are where they should be, or if something needs to get moved. So it's really important to know that actually, although what everyone thinks of is the trials are actually a very small part of the kinds of hearings that you have in the Crown Court. And that is the final hearing that's normally at the end of a series of hearings that you've had with a client. There are, broadly speaking, 2 different courts in the criminal justice system. The magistrates' court is where all cases start out, and I think about 70 to 80% of cases will stay. Anything that's not so serious in comparison to the overall criminal catalogue, that is punishable by up to 6 months in prison, will stay in the magistrates' court. In the Crown Court, you have the full range up to murder, which is life imprisonment. If we go into a room together and you tell me that you have committed the crime that you're accused of, my advice to you, and the only advice that I can give to you, is that you plead guilty. Now, if you plead guilty, then there's no issue with me representing you, because we all understand that you did it. It's just about mitigating the situation or your circumstances. But with cases, and this has happened, where someone says, I did it, but I don't want to go guilty, well, I can't put forward what's called a positive case. So we can go to trial, and if the issue is identification, what I can do is I can ask the witness about the circumstances in which they saw the person. I can, it was dark, it was from a distance, there was bad weather, there was a car parked in obscuring your view, and all of this to essentially test the quality of that person's identification. I can't go any further than that. I can't go further and say, well, he wasn't there, was he? And I can't present an alibi or anything, because I know that my client was there. That is the correct identification. So yeah, you run a non-positive case. Normally they're not successful. And I always say this is my job is to help someone present a case. It's not for me to help them build a case. So if I walk in there, I do not go, well, if you say this, that will get you out of here. No. Tell me what happened, and I'll help you prepare a case based on what happened. But yeah, there is a obligation not to mislead the court, and in legal jargon, a court will understand we're not raising a positive case, which I think everyone, wink wink, nudge nudge, okay, we know even though we weren't there, we know what happened in that conference. It's entirely possible if someone's got mental health issues, drug issues, they might not remember what they were doing that day. So there are other reasons, and the jury will not be told about that, because obviously that happened in a conference which is confidential, and you're not allowed to ever talk about that. So rewinding to if someone tells me they've done it, I can't present that they didn't do it to the court, but I can't tell anyone what happened in that conference. And there's no obligation. Well, no, there are some obligations involving, I think, terrorism and finance stuff, but generally speaking, there's no obligations for you to ever disclose what your clients discussed with you, including if you have a trial, they're acquitted, and then they tell you they did it. I would guess that most barristers, if not all barristers, would adhere to the professional standards. The thing is, because a barrister has very limited client interaction, and most criminal barristers will prosecute and defend, so they're very objective. And there is a real inclination, and there are lots of things wrong with the barrister archetype, but there is a real genuine instinct towards fairness and honesty. So although I haven't met every single criminal barrister, I would be fairly confident in saying most, if not all, of my colleagues would adhere to that. I preferred defending because I preferred working with a client. My skill set kind of lent itself to more vulnerable clients because of the mental health background. I work a lot with kids as well, doing youth cases. And I just feel more strongly about that. It's very easy to judge a lot of people that find themselves in the criminal justice system, but for me, I see it as almost kind of like a spiritual thing, being there for people that no one cares about. And obviously that is more prevalent when you're defending than when you're prosecuting, because your client, when you prosecute, is the Crown Prosecution Service. The Crown Prosecution Service, Kafkaesque, I think would be a single word to describe it. There's some other multiple words, but we'll perhaps stay away from. And yeah, it's much easier for me, at least, in terms of inclination and instinct, to pull something apart than it is to put something together. And when you're prosecuting, that's what you do. This is your show. You're the first person to speak. You introduce everything. You've got the order of things being called in. You're building a narrative. Whereas when you're defending, to a certain extent, you're just pulling threads.
Hi, and welcome to Deep.
We're a brand new channel from the team behind such shows as
Agree to Disagree, Minutes Within the Gap, to name a few.
And now we've launched this new channel to keep telling stories.
And we love to hear what you think. So if there's a particular person you want to hear from, a particular theme that you want us to cover, please drop us a comment, and also like and subscribe for more.
We really hope you're enjoying the channel, and if you are, we've just launched a brand new Patreon account with all sorts of extra content.
Early access, extra videos, behind the scenes clips, and even merch. If that sounds good to you, then check out the link in our description.
Thank you, hit that subscribe button, and now back to our story.
The cases that matter to me are more cases of omission, in that if I defend a young person who's under the age of 18 and I never hear from them again, I consider that a success. Unfortunately, there's only a couple clients that I know that fall into that bracket, and they stick out. And it's not because the case was in any way, shape or form memorable. It was very generic, actually. But the point is as far as I can tell, at least for now, that young person has made good on their promise to do better. Say you've got a client, Billy, who has, at the age of 45, has a string of assaults against partners, and you're taking his case on. He wants to go to trial. He's accused of assaulting a partner. Win, lose or draw, that person may well find themselves back in the criminal justice system. With young people, there is still the capacity to change. Here's the thing, and maybe we don't talk about it enough in the criminal justice system. We are too far downstream to make a significant impact. By the time you get to a room in which I am in, normally several things, not just one or two, have gone wrong in your life. And certainly if someone is now 30 years deep into a Class A drug habit, or 30 years deep into a pattern of offending, quite apart from all the childhood trauma and the socioeconomic deprivation, they've now got decades worth of, of behavior that has become a model for how they interact with the world. Crime and punishment have been around for a very long time. And no matter how much we punish people, it doesn't seem to do anything about the crime rate. The answer is not in the criminal justice system. We had Operation Early Dawn, which is where they were keeping people in police stations because there was no room in the prisons. There was then the 40% rule that came in recently to make space. Prisons are awash with drugs. I think recently a drug sampling of prisoners came back like 70% on drugs. I can say this now, gangs are ruling the prisons, particularly in London. I mean, I've had kids turn up to trials without any clothes, or old clothes that were very, very dirty because they were being robbed for everything they had because they weren't a member of a gang. People are in 23-hour a day bang up. They're at over capacity. I mean, in Pentonville for a long time, they couldn't get hot meals because rats were living in the oven. cockroaches everywhere, violence endemic, self-harming endemic, and the previous government decided to cut a lot of the old prison officers and budget constraints. So now there are issues as well amongst young, inexperienced officers being in charge of too many prisoners in very violent prisons. And some of those officers are also susceptible to corruption. And in answer to your question about rehabilitation, at least inside of custody, there's very little in terms of therapeutic programs available to people inside. There are some, and often actually prisoners will take advantage of it, if only for it getting them out their cell for a while. We have known that this was going to happen for a significant period of time. Just no one did anything. Look, it's not politically palatable. More money for prisoners. No one's running on that ticket. But you say, obviously funding is an issue. Funding is the only issue. And I talk about prisons specifically. Rory Stewart, for his very, very brief sojourn on the front bench when he was the prisons minister. 10 Prisons Project was successful. He turned around 10 of the worst performing prisons in the United Kingdom. How do you do that? With money. We know how to do it, but we just don't have the money. It's the same, I would actually argue, throughout the criminal justice system. We actually know how to do it, and we have a lot of the human capital to make things more efficient. We just don't have the resources. It is a myth that COVID and the barrister strike caused the backlog. It is a myth. The backlog existed before those. Okay? The backlog existed because they cut legal aid in real terms by almost 40%. They closed down the courts. They sold one of the courts off, Blackfriars Crown Court, one of the only purpose-built Crown Courts in London for criminal matters. They sold it off, and now it's used as a TV studio. So whenever you see them filming inside of a Crown Court, yeah, they're doing that in Blackfriars. They cut the sitting days, so the amount of days that judges could sit to save money. So that put an artificial bottleneck on how many matters could be heard. And then also because of the cuts in legal aid, people just started leaving the profession.
And what impact does this have on the country?
If I was to be accused by you, say, of a violent assault, the chances of us going to trial in the next 12 months is almost zero. So maybe 2-3 years down the line, you come to trial, Danny, and you won't remember what you were doing 2 years ago. There will be a lot of holes, completely innocently so, in your memory about what happened 2 years ago. You might also feel the passage of time, it's just not worth it, mate. I just want to put it behind me. I just want to move on with my life. So what you're getting is cases where people are turning up for trial years after they've happened. The defendant has been on bail this whole time. They can't move on with their life. The complainant is what we would call the person you might refer to as a victim. We use the word complainant because it's more emotionally neutral. But the complainants also had this hanging over them. No one can remember anything because it was so darn long ago. If the complainant turns up at all. Alternatively, you have people who are on remand. That is, they don't get bail. And they can spend up to 12 months, 18 months have had. And they just put their hands up and go, I'm guilty. Are you actually guilty? No, Nathan, I just want to go home. I'm guilty. Tell them I'm guilty. I just want to go home. So that is the massive issue, particularly as well with more difficult, sensitive crimes against children, crimes of a sexual nature. That is one of the reasons that you see such low conviction rates. It's because that is a very emotionally difficult thing for someone to live with for years, waiting for a trial. I know that they try and expedite those matters, and there was talk about specialist rape courts under the Labour government, but nothing seems to have materialised. So yeah, the impact is very, very few crimes that could have potentially been successfully resolved, either in a prosecution or acquittal, are actually happening the way that they should be, according to justice and due process. The number one priority would be to make going to prison the only punishment. Issues with drugs and rats' nests, that is degrading to the human soul. Okay, you're taking away people's dignity, and that is over and beyond what that punishment is supposed to be. when they are subjected to coercion and violence, you are violating their autonomy in a way that is not permissible in law. But it is permissible if you take away their freedom, and it just so happens that a natural adjunct of that is that someone else will harm them. So yeah, to me, actually, it's not any grand idea about, oh yeah, drug courts or this, that, whatever. Actually, just calming the violence, the exploitation, and the stripping of human dignity, so that on top of having a criminal record and all the reasons that they found themselves in jail, they don't come out with PTSD from that experience as well. Yeah, actually, I'll tell you what it is. And it's the thing that causes most of the problems, and it's the reason most people leave. It's called listing. You may think that you would have a trial date and it was set at a date in the future, and we all turn up and we all do it. That's not what happens. What happens is you'll be told it's in a warned list for the next 2 weeks. It could come in any day in those 2 weeks, or it might not come in at all. So from a professional perspective, I've done all the work on this case. I know you very, very well. I don't get paid, by the way, for anything that happens outside of court. So we might have had innumerable conferences. We might have had a lot of work done on this case, but I haven't been paid anything for it. I'm also in another case that has, for instance, children involved. Because neither of them have been given a set date, they both come in at the same time, which is not unusual. If you looked at my professional diary, every week I've got 3 or 4 trials that may or may not happen. I don't even know which one's going to come in, or if any of them are going to come in. I don't even know when some of them have concluded until I go back and look in the paper. And I'm like, oh, you know, like through the papers of the case, like, oh yeah, so someone covered that. It's nice for someone to tell me that it ended. The 2 cases get called on. I have to prioritize the children case, right? Because I have to do my own triage of what the most important thing is. So I prioritize that case, and that means I can't do your case. You know me, and we've done a lot of work together, but I can't do it. Which now means someone picks up your case about 6 o'clock the night before, and they run with it. So back in the day, I mean, I say back in the day, it probably still applies now. The courts were pretty filthy, and they were filled with lice. So a lot of the advocates and the gentlemen that inhabited it on a professional capacity would just shave their heads and rock the wig. The wigs are typically made of horsehair. I'm slightly allergic to horsehair, I found out. I never rubbed my face all over a horse before, so I wasn't expecting it, but it makes me sneeze a bit. There are vegan alternatives as well. So that comes from that. The black gowns, well, originally people wore gowns as a symbol of being learned. We actually even in court refer to each other as my learned friend, rather than Mr. Tom's or Mr. da-da-da. And then a king died, and they dyed it black in mourning, and it stuck. I tell you what, though, it is a good thing. People don't recognize you when you're not in the get-up. Genuinely, they don't. And it gives you a little bit of anonymity. Stylistically, there's a lot more bombast, and there's a lot more personality. People take it a bit more personally as far as I can tell, in the American system. We have an adversarial system too, right? It's me against the prosecutor. But there are limits. Like, you still have to be professional. It's kind of an unspoken rule. You don't talk with your hands. That you present things in this very subtle, polite, almost kind of meek way. And it's always very professional and very polite. And you don't pace up and down through the room. You don't do like dramatic things. It's really about the case stands on its own. In theory, the court is open to anyone to come in and watch, but very few people do. Except from some quite strange individuals who sort of make it a bit of a hobby. But I think everyone should be getting involved, and if recording makes it a bit easier for people to participate and see what their money is going towards, and also see the dire state of the situation, that's really good. Of course, there are matters in which, you know, members of the public are not allowed, cases involving children, things like that. But yeah, absolutely, bring the cameras. There was a play which was recorded and I think has just come back out in the BFI called Prima Facie, which is a one-woman show about a criminal defense advocate, female criminal defense advocate, who becomes a victim of a crime. Now, I think I have some foibles with it in terms of, I think there is slightly an anti-lawyer feel. You know, I think a lot of people think, oh, if you were a victim of a crime, you would feel differently. Well, you know, I have been a victim of a crime. Most of us living in London have, unfortunately. You know, I don't take any delight in what I do, and it's not a lack of empathy for the people involved. But that said, she was absolutely brilliant. She played the female archetype of a criminal defense barrister fantastically. One of the worst representations, it's a very minor point, but at the end of Baby Reindeer, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that because of what the ongoing litigation, but at the end of Baby Reindeer, the way that it was set up, in which the person accepts their guilt and their sentence, it isn't like that. They put in a plea or they send it up. In a case like that, they would have just sent it up to a Crown Court, but it was set up like a magistrate's court. And it's just, this is a very, very common thing, is they blend the magistrates and the Crown Court together, and people sometimes wear wigs or don't wear wigs or whatever. But I remember distinctly watching that final scene of Baby Reindeer and being like, are we in the Crown or are we in the magistrates? Where are we? I was saying it to my my girlfriend, who was just such sharp, just sharp. No one cares. It's easy to think that people who find themselves in jail or other situations involving the criminal justice system are very different to you or I. But the fact is actually, if you add enough risk factors, crimogenic risk factors, which is, you know, sort of trauma in early life experiences, particularly around physical or sexual abuse, a low socioeconomic background, low educational attainment, and you're a man, right? That most people, if present in those environments with those risk factors, actually would find themselves in similar situations. And it is very easy to forget that and think that they're somehow different. And the other point is bad people that do bad things, they don't look like bad people. They just look like people because they are. You know, they don't have horns or tails, and they don't walk around with a little name tag saying, I am evil, I do evil. It's much more subtle and nuanced and textured than that. And I think that texture and subtlety and nuance is not easily reducible to a tabloid headline. But it is a fact. I think it's a fact of life. And perhaps when we could appreciate that better and have a more in-depth discussion about why people do bad things, we might see some change.